Hey, what's going on? It's Bebop here, and I'm going to be going over the basics of M3 tanking. So, when you're getting into M3 tanking, it might seem a little bit daunting, a little bit scary at first. I think the max con you want to go with is 300. So what I like to do, first of all, is get whatever weapons you're going to have, if it's flail and hammer or sword and shield and hammer. And I wanted to get you to 300 constitution. So with this set, I still have plenty of these banana puddings left over, which gives you 44 con. Now let's go here, and it puts me right at 300. With the flail and hammer, here's what I run. 300 constitution. I got the 50 focus, so the first dot will give you 5% ability cooldown reduction, and the second one is 10% incoming healing. And then I go all the way to the 250 mark on strength, which is just fine. You got plenty of damage with the hammer, plenty of damage with the flail, and you're going to be holding aggro just fine doing it this way. If you go sword and shield, I recommend basically going 300, 300. That's what you want to have. So not this current setup, but you want to have 300, 300, okay? I don't want to restat. I mean, it's only 50 now, but you can just look at it. 300, 300 is what you want with a sword and shield and hammer, okay? That's mainly what most DPS tanks are going to go. I mean, what most tanks are going to go with at this level. And what you want to do is get you a hammer with a refreshing move, hated, sundering clear out, or refreshing move, thwarting strikes and sundering clear out. But basically your hammer has to have sundering clear out. And I would highly suggest refreshing move because you want your cooldowns as fast as you can. Yes, in the skill tree, there's inherent dots that you could pick that will give you basically refreshing move anyways. But if you add refreshing move on top of that, cooldowns are super fast, and that's what you need with the hammer. With the flail, I like refreshing move and vicious, crowded bludgeon, of course, so I can get the cooldowns a lot faster with the crowded bludgeon when there's a big mob around. Basically just spam ability after ability, keep taunting. But refreshing move is really good to help get the cooldowns back. Obviously you could also go with trenchant strikes if you even wanted to. If you had a trenchant strikes refreshing move, crowded bludgeon, you know, that might be really good. The flail suffers from damage, so with the trenchant strikes at least you'd have a little bit more damage. But a refreshing move, vicious, crowded bludgeon seems to work just fine right now. With the sword, it depends on what enemies you're going against. If I'm going against any enemies that I can do more thrust damage with, then the empowering leaping strike is what I'm going to have. If I'm going to go with enemies that I can do more damage with the whirling blade, which is slash damage, then I'll go with the whirling blade. And vicious refreshing move is pretty much standard. You need to have that on your sword. If you do run the butcher, now that the keenly jaggeds don't stack, I'm not going to be running the butcher. I'm going to let some high DPS person do that because the tanks, you know, bleeds are not going to be that good. So not going to waste chance for more DPS just because I want to run the butcher. But if you do run the butcher, try to find a shield. If you look up the Nightville, you know, the Halloween shields that you can craft, they do have a refreshing move on them. So feel free to check that out. With the heart runes, with tanking, resilient vines is one of my favorites. Not my it actually is my favorite. I was gonna say if not one of my favorites, but it is my favorite. Gain fortify on activation, increasing armor by 20%, reduce outgoing damage by 20% for 5 seconds. But you can really get aggro on maybe some enemies that are a little bit out of your reach with the sword, or when the DPS throws a nice grab well, boom, you put it down, keep them all there right next to you. You could also, a lot of tanks go with the stone form. The stone form's really good too. Gain additional 10% armor for 5 seconds per hit taken. So that can help you out. And the good thing about that is if you activate it while blocking, it doesn't make you unblock like the vines would. You have to unblock, put them down, and then get back to blocking. Stone form will just happen as you're still blocking. So it's really, really, really good for tank. It's really probably the best thing for tank because your DPSs should have the vines. But another thing right here is the regeneration serum. Any big pulls you do with the mobs, go ahead and pop one of these. They are expensive. They're about 30 gold per on Marma server right now. Only use these on big pulls. They're really good. 400 health, 1% of your max health, 5 stamina, and compared to 240 health for the infused regen potions. So refuse regens for the main dungeon until you get to a big pool, then you can do the regen serum. Every tank must have despised on their earring. I like that, you know, and nimble, I think. And healing heart's really good. Is when you use your heart rune, you also get health. You could go also with healthy toast. So when you drink a mana pot, then you get 15% of your max health. Look at whatever dungeon type you're running. This week I'm going to be doing Tempest, so it is fire. So make sure you have whatever the element is, you have that protection on your amulet. Health is really good to have also. Divine would be really good. Fortify recovery is fine. And a lot of tanks will say, well, I can have this flame protection on my shield. Yes, you can. Absolutely. You go, boy. Yes, you can, bruh. But when you switch to the hammer, you no longer have that protection. So you're going to drop down. So just remember that. You're going to be more susceptible to damage. But the hammer does give it, you know, a lot of fortifying and protection. So if you feel like that's a good trade-off, then go ahead and do that. I like to have, for me, instead of flame shield ward or whatnot, I like to have ones with strike protection, you know, thrust protection, slash protection, void protection. Depends on what enemies I'm going against. And if I'm running a flail, then I can have different shields. Obviously I wouldn't need fortified shield rush with the flail, so a lot of my sword and shield shields, it's weird to say, have fortified shield rush on them. See if I can find one. Well, they're here somewhere. And then when I would switch to a flail, then I would switch to something like this, you know, enchanted ward, shield defense, sturdy, void shield ward, especially in Tempest. You know, if you fight that first boss, then strike shield ward is really good. You would want to go in there with a strike amulet, and then you could have a strike shield ward for extra strike protection. But as a tank, really shouldn't need it. You should be just fine. So that covers the weapons, the shield, the earring, and the amulet. I'm also gonna say, if you run the lost stopwatch and you do the elements on your shield, that's perfectly fine. With the lost stopwatch, you could actually, you don't have to run Carnelians. You could run Moonstone or whatever you feel you want to run in there, because the taunts are going to be strong enough to still work without having to have a Carnelian in your weapon. I would suggest, if you're new, still keep a Carnelian in your weapon, because if you're not a very active tank and you just taunt and you hide behind the shield, that is not going to hold aggro for very long. You got to be active. Let me go over the skill trees real quick. So for Warhammer, I would like you to set it up like this. And yes, there is 4 abilities. So in the main dungeon parts, when you're knocking down enemies, you want to keep Wrecking Ball, of course, Shockwave, and Clear Out. So the Shockwave, I have the Rend, the Sundering Shockwave on my chest. That's 10% Rend. And then I have the Sundering Clear Out, which is 25% Rend. And then when you go to bosses, go to Armor Breaker, and it's going to add 30% Rend for 10 seconds. Now when you go back to fighting the mobs throughout the dungeon, go back to Wrecking Ball. Then when you get to the final boss, boom, go back to Armor Breaker. When you get more used to it, you can maybe just keep Armor Breaker on, depending, but that's how I'd like you to set it up. And with the sword and shield, this is how I like to run it right here. I like this dot because you get, if your health is above 50%, damage reduction is increased by 20%. You also get the extra 10% healing with this dot. Now, Shield Rush is extremely awesome because it's going to weaken all the enemies with this dot right here that are 5 meters around you. 20% weaken for 10 seconds. It's almost equivalent to a Maelstrom. It's so good. Do not ever go defensive formation as a tank. Just don't do it. Don't do it. Okay? Don't do it. Go leadership all the time. 10% damage bonus for all group members is huge. That's basically 30% from your DPS. If your healer's doing damage, then that's another 10%. So you want to make sure you have leadership. Whatever abilities you want to pick, whatever dots you want to pick, I don't care. Just make sure you have leadership abilities. on the flail. I have this as my flail setup. It's not BIS tanking setup by any means for the flail, but it's fun, and getting through M3s with it is just fine. You know, you can add some of this other stuff if you want to add more impairments or make your debuffs last longer on the bosses, but me, I love the barrage because I can get to enemies really quickly and taunt enemies as I'm running past them. The warding bludgeon is really good to help keep your taunts going, and also to get reinforced and to give one of your DPS's empower. And then you got Arcane Vortex, which will help unroot any teammates that are nearby, also give everybody haste, and it's just extremely good. You'll have this no matter what flail setup you go with. Now if we look here at the sword and shield, I have a no refreshing setup and I have a max refreshing setup. With no refreshing, your sword and shield Defender's Resolve is 45 seconds long cooldown, 20 seconds for the shield rush, and 18 seconds for the leaping strike. If you go with the max refreshing set, sword and shield Defender's Resolve is going to be 35.6, so 9.4 seconds faster. Instead of 20 seconds, you got 15.8. Instead of 18 seconds, you got 14.2. Those seconds do matter. Those seconds do matter. If I was to stare at the screen, if I had my camera on for 4.8 seconds to 9 seconds, you'd probably think I was season out, or, you know, wonder why you're watching some creep stare at the camera. So it's longer than you expect. So you want to have max refreshing on your gear. So if you do rock the Frigid Dawn set, just make sure that you have refreshing on 4 pieces, please. You can also have refreshing on your earring or your amulet, but make sure you have that. It'll help you out, and especially with the sword and shield, you need to get your taunts as fast as you can. All right, let's talk a little bit about weapon perks. So like you see here, I have Sundering Shockwave on my clothing. Now if I don't have a shield, let's say like this one with Fortify Shield Rush, I could have that on my clothing. It won't be as strong as if it was on the shield, but it's still really, really good. So you could have that. You could have Whirling Blade on your clothing. If you, instead of Leaping Strike, you want to go with Whirling Blade, and maybe you don't have a sword that has the Whirling Blade buff, you could do that. You could have, if you have a hammer that you're going to work with for a while that's got Sundering Shockwave, well, you could have Sundering Clear Out on your clothes. Do something like that to help benefit your whole group and yourself with weapon perks on your clothes. That will help you, you know, do more damage, more DPS, and it'll help the DPS do more damage too. The ring's going to be a little bit tricky. You could go to slash damage ring with the sword and shield, and with the flail you could go strike damage ring or arcane damage ring. I switch back and forth throughout, let's say, Tempest. So I am being corrupted enemies, the chances of getting criticals go down dramatically with a slash weapon. Same thing with the strike weapon. So for me, getting Keen Awareness to have that extra critical chance is huge. I get Empower anytime I want with the sword by just holding down a heavy attack. The flail, I'm not really worried about Empowered much because it's not a damage weapon. It's just constant taunt weapon and mobility weapon. So Keen Awareness, I believe, is more beneficial than the strike damage or the arcane damage or the slash damage. Especially I don't have Whirling Blade on, so slash damage is not really important right now. And a lot of mobs you'll end up switching to the hammer anyways, and that's strike damage. When you look at mutations, I'm going to be doing Tempest this week. So what the hell? They changed them? Video edit, man. All right, well, they changed dungeons on me, so I guess I'm not going to be doing Tempest with Fire Gems. What a waste. All right, so when you're looking at M3 expeditions, we'll take Glacial Tarn that just changed over. So in the M1, you would have the ice damage, and the M2, they'll start throwing the second category at you that can change, and this one's Barbaric. In M3, you'll have a third category. So the second category here is Barbaric. So basically the enemies are going to get bigger and grow larger, and also shatter your blocking, your stamina way faster, tanks. So get ready for that. And then here, censored blowback ice using abilities depletes a global affliction. So basically silence. And so the more abilities used, the faster the silence goes up. So as a tank, you got to learn how to gauge when the silence is about to pop off. Find an area that you can pull the enemies out of the silence zone so the DPS can go back to using their abilities, and you can go back to taunting. And Truncated, while the silence zones are active, all players lose natural mana regeneration. Standing in the silence zones grants 25 mana per 0.75 seconds. So yay. So censored. Oh man, tanks. That's one thing you're gonna hate doing is tanking in censored dungeons. Okay. Silence is a problem, especially it's not so much of a problem if you're running with a group that knows how to proc silence before you engage in a battle. But if you start engaging in a battle, like F this tree, right? Like let's beat this tree's butt. And then the silence procs, now it's like, okay, well shoot, let me run over here. When y'all were running up to the enemy, you could have proc silence over here, then everybody goes up and starts fighting and getting to abilities while silence is on the cooldown and then having to charge up. You get a lot more time DPS and you can melt the crews a lot faster. And that's how you want to tank silence. Let's look at some other examples here. So like I said, they just changed overs as I was doing this video, so they don't even have the symbol for the mutated, because it was Starstone, Tempest, and Barnacles, but we just had Starstone and Tempest last week, so they changed it. Thank good AGS, good job. All right, so fire. This week's fire, obviously flame, and we have festering, slicers. Oh goodness gravy. Enemies apply a stacking disease on hit, reducing incoming healing by 2.5 to 5% per stack. So tanks, the 50% focus is going to be a thing you want to look at. It gives you 10% extra incoming healing, and then the other skill tree on the sword and shield that also gives you 10% healing. Enemies cast a slicing beams that deal 30% base void damage. So that's pretty big time. That's gonna hurt. That's gonna hurt the DPS for sure. So they better be able to stay in sacred. So what you want to do as a tank, if you're, let's say we run up to an enemy like this tree right here, and we're fighting, okay, and I'm tickling him with the flail because the flails suck. Anyways, you want to make sure, since you don't want to box your teammates or block your teammates out of, I wish I had a life staff on me right now. Holy crap. I think I do. Where is it? Okay, I don't have a life staff, but let's say we're approaching an enemy and I'm starting to fight, and the healer throws down their, you know, sacred. Obviously sacred's not going to be this big, but they throw down their sacred and I keep pushing up. If I push the DPS out of the sacred, they're going to be way more susceptible to getting knocked. If you see you're at the very edge of the sacred, back your ass up and let them come to you, and that way the DPS can also be in the sacred. Okay, you gotta be a manager of the team and the squad as a tank. You gotta see a lot of stuff. That's why most people don't want to tank, is because they're scared of all the responsibility. It's a very big responsibility being a tank, which I actually love that responsibility at times, because it can be fun, because you're managing a lot and you're having to do a lot of communications, seeing aggro on the enemies, your cooldowns. If you lost aggro, can you get to that enemy? You know, things like that. And then are the DPS in the sacred? You know, how everybody's health, where, you know, just all sorts of stuff going on. So now I'm gonna work on a video more in depth tanking that's gonna go through a dungeon. So this week I'll probably get on my Giggity account, set up a tanking set, and show you as I go through the dungeon. So be sure to check out that video, and if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, hit me up in the comments. I will answer back. All right, hopefully that helped you. Let me know later.